Cartoonist Kayfabe, 1 year later. What does the kayfabe effect mean to you? We'll discuss this and more on today's episode of Comic-Jutsu, where we discuss the art of comics. Welcome back. This is JT, your host, with you once again. And today we are going to celebrate the inspiration and influence that we received from the now defunct Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. Cartoonist Kayfabe was primarily a YouTube show where artist and writer Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg broke down comics and art and how they were created. In fact, they were Eisner-Award winning cartoonists. They examined popular and influential comic books, stories, and artists from comics history, including manga, superheroes, comic strips, the undergrounds, alternative comics, and graphic novels. And believe it or not, they even did page by page flip throughs of the 90s comics magazine Wizards. The cry, read more comics and make more comics, went out every day from that channel, and it was a huge inspiration to myself and a lot of other people that discovered the show during the pandemic. Honestly, I mean, that's where I came into it. You know, if I share my personal interaction with Cartoonist Kayfabe, I was trapped in my house in quarantine during the summer of 2020. I think I had seen something in 2019, but I really didn't click on anything that they were doing until 2020, and it was also in just kind of a weird roundabout way. Longtime denizens of the comic book dojo will tell you that I have been working on my graphic novel, which I've been doing an immense amount of research for several years, in addition to the process of creating the whole thing. Recently just finished my roughs all the way through, and I'm in the process of transferring it all to its final form. But anyway, so when I'm creating things and I'm looking for inspiration, or I'm just trying to get out of first gear, so to speak, to get those creative wheels flowing, get those creative juices flowing, of course, I'll just flip around. I'll look for random books, random comics, random movies, random TV shows, random YouTube shows. Believe it or not, I had found a video on the Jerk Comics channel, fan of his channel as well, discussing Deathmate Red, the infamous story behind Deathmate Red, which, if you don't know, Deathmate was part of a multi-company crossover between Valiant Comics and Image Comics at the time, and it was something that was advertised everywhere in Wizard magazine, and it was fantastic. Actually, the idea of it was much better than the execution, because it seemed like wow, we're going to get a combination of this great writing from Valiant combined with the fantastic dynamic art styles of Image Comics, and that wasn't what happened at all. We got these weird amalgamated comics where they kind of mushed their companies together, which is what the story was about. Though to me that was much more disappointing than like an actual proper crossover that's part of continuity, instead of it all being part of this dream sequence thing. But anyway, so Valiant made their version, so you got the good comics with the serviceable art. I mean, some people might call it even boring, but I mean, it's just serviceable. And then you got the Image books that had fantastic, dynamic, over-the-top artwork through most of the books, but the story was just like, what is happening here? There was no story, no real plot, so to speak. And the last one out of the gate was Deathmate Red, which was supposed to be the Extreme Studios Rob Liefeld contribution. And there's a whole big crazy story behind it. I do encourage you to go check out some of the various videos about it, like Jerk Comics. You can start there, and then even Cartoonist Kayfabe went on to do their own. But somehow I was led over from Jerk Comics, Deathmate Red, to Cartoonist Kayfabe. I guess because they had done so much talking about the Image books. It was one of the things that they did was they really promoted their love of early Image, and that really spoke to me. I mean, because I was there. I was a young man in school at the time, trying to do my best to make my own comics, which really hasn't changed over the years, except for the time that I spent making video and film projects with Mutantville. But I've followed the Image exodus very closely. I mean, because these guys were my favorite artists. They left Marvel at the height of their powers, went and started this whole other company, which really did kind of break the stranglehold of Marvel and DC upon the entire industry. It really made Image like a viable third publisher, which is still going to today. And now that's not to discredit or diminish the work of things that of publishers that had come before. Your Fantagraphics, your Kitchen Sink Press, your Dark Horses, your Valiants, so on and so forth. I mean, there are a lot of them out there that chipped away at the monopoly that DC and Marvel maintained over the industry for so many years. So I suddenly discovered Cartoonist Kayfabe. I'm in quarantine. What else am I going to do? I'm trying to at the time I was still working out the exact plot for my graphic novel, and I'm just hitting that creative brick wall, and I thought, well, let me see what these guys are talking about. So the very first video I watched, they broke down the Weapon X storyline by Barry Windsor Smith, and I think they had gotten a hold of like a bootleg artist edition. Now I might be conflating this with a later episode because they talked about it a couple times, and somebody had created like a bootleg artist edition that just had the line art throughout the book, and it wasn't fully colored and all of that. But anyway, just watching them break down Weapon X, which was definitely a favorite series of mine. I mean, that was one that I had bought off the spinner rack at the time, and really the art was it was too good for me, but it was so good, and it fit that storyline and the story that it created and filled in about Wolverine's whole Weapon X experience and backstory. I really loved at the time. And the way that Ed and Jim shared not only their enthusiasm, but also their knowledge, because I would love when they would point out specific artistic techniques, like, oh, this is a pen, oh, this is a brush, what kind of pen do you think this is? Oh, it's a Copic this or that, or look here, this is non-archival ink used here or there. And, to hear two guys that were knowledgeable and just enthusiastic and usually overly positive. I mean, you very rarely heard them say much negative, but they did come up from time to time, and apparently that did rankle some feathers behind the scenes, because there was obvious growing resentment at the Cartoonist Kayfabe success of both their channel and the individual comics that they produced. But anyway, I love the way that Ed and Jim would break down the stories. They didn't examine it so much from a writing or storytelling point of view, like, this panel to panel transition, like, what does this mean? What's the metaphor here? What does this symbolism mean? But it was really like a nuts and bolts, like almost two mechanics breaking down the inside of a car, and that's what was really fun. I mean, that's a dialogue that it's hard to find. I mean, I've attended what's probably the world's greatest comic convention, Heroes Con here in Charlotte, North Carolina, for almost like 30 something years, and during that time, you could really only get these nuts and bolts discussions really in face-to-face encounters with your artists, your favorite artists and your favorite writers there, or during panel sessions where you had chances to talk to them and get feedback or just ask questions or whatnot. So to have this knowledge accessible just at the push of a button was just such a boon to me, and it really did during what was a dark time for the entire world. Really gave me a light and really helped not rekindle my passion or anything. So it wasn't like I had walked away or I was lost or I didn't know what to do next or whatever. But when you're just facing those creative blocks where you have writer's block or whatever, and you can't get through the next piece, it inspired me enough to go out look back at some of my favorite books, like Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X, for example, and teach myself how to regain that inspiration and just keep pushing forward, just keep moving forward. There were things that Ed would say, like, I would notice artists struggling to find that perfect line, how they would erase and redo everything, and really you just need to do it. You just need to make it and then go on to the next one. And there's a lot to be said about that mentality. A lot good and some negative. I mean, because I'm not a fan of just creating something just to create it, in the sense of just creating more mediocrity to just throw out there into this tsunami of comic publishing that comes out every month, every year, every decade. I would like to make something evergreen and something good that can both entertain people and also reach them in different ways. And there are a lot of people that disagree with that sentiment, and they just want to, just, hey, this is my funny story, or this is my autobiographical comic book. And to me, all of those approaches are valid. That's what I've always said is, yeah, you can do junk food comics, you can do pop culture, nonsensical, forgettable comics. But there are also times when you can do something that can become a profound work. Looking at the history of comics, something like Art Spiegelman's Mouse, or the classics that everybody always talks about, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, Daredevil Run, Daredevil Born Again, the various Alan Moore works, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, what have you. And that's what I really mean is when a work can really kind of transcend the medium and touch things and affect things in the world. Like, look at V for Vendetta. I mean, we've had a lot of strange things that have been spawned out of this by people that have probably never even read the comics, and maybe not even seen more than the movie trailer from the adaptation that came from the comics. But anyway, that's the thing that I love about comics, and it is an American art form, and it's one to be celebrated. And that was something that Cartoonist Kayfabe did better than anybody. Now, lest I do a disservice to Tom Scioli, I have to mention him as the third member of Cartoonist Kayfabe, as I enjoyed his commentary as he comes through, and I still enjoy checking out Tom's show, the Total Recall show. Since the end of Cartoonist Kayfabe, I've really enjoyed following Tom's work. I understand why Jim wouldn't want to produce anything anymore. I mean, Ed was really the MC, if you will, if I could borrow a hip hop term. He was the guy that was behind the mic that, from what I could tell, probably did all of the editing and uploading and the controlling of the bulk of the social media stuff. And I mean, all of that is a real grind. And I really respected the way that those guys would put out a video every day. I mean, just boom, like clockwork. There was one every day. And that is so hard to do. I mean, it's near impossible for me. I mean, I can't maintain that pace just by myself because obviously I still work a day job in addition to all of my artistic endeavors that I do, in my off hours. So it's like already working two jobs, and then you have this third job of doing this promotion. But it was something that they seemed to manage like almost effortlessly, and I definitely applauded them for that. And I also applauded that they didn't hold back when it came to sharing their knowledge of, okay, this is how you make this line. This is how you make a comic book, that kind of thing. They never did the breakdown, like understanding sequential illustration, like rhythm, or this kind of storytelling technique. But when it came to putting, lines on paper or color on paper or whatnot, or even, the final creation of that product and making it a real book or graphic novel or floppy comic or what have you, they really didn't hold back. They shared everything that they had to share, and that's something that was hard to find. I mean, unless you were a student at the Kubert School, this was just something you could not find. I mean, I even took what was supposed to be a class about comic book creating many years ago, and it was really anything but. It was really just just like a basic art class, just still life drawing and that kind of stuff, talking about perspective and whatnot. But it never got into the nuts and bolts of, okay, this is how sequential illustration works. Really, I could have taught the class based on what they shared. I was really, really disappointed with that. So to find something where you had Ed and Jim sharing their knowledge and their inspiration in an almost unfiltered manner was just so refreshing, and especially during a time like the pandemic. So I asked people, what does the kayfabe effect mean to you 1 year later? The kayfabe effect, if you're not familiar, was something that probably Ed coined it, because Ed came up with a lot of the terminology, but it was the notion that when they would talk about a book on their show, people would go and buy it, and prices would often kind of jump up. There was speculation involved in those things where if people were aware that suddenly Ed and Jim were talking about something, that they would raise the prices on the books that they were selling that had been featured on the show. And that was kind of what they were calling the kayfabe effect. Now, mind you, people who talk about that, like after 3 months, it would die down because they'd already talked about 3 more months worth of books every single day since then, and prices would just go back down to normal. So it was a temporary kayfabe effect at best, but it was great. Other things I really enjoyed, I loved their Wizard walkthroughs. I was there, I had Wizard 1 in my hands and didn't buy it at the time because I was just like, this just looks like crap. But I didn't know it was going to be such a long-running magazine, and essentially kind of a chronicle of the history of comics through the 90s, through that really important gestation period of what would become the modern indie comic scenes. And I know there are several other phases. We have underground comics from decades before and the great independent works of the 80s and whatnot, but Image really helped break that stranglehold. I can't emphasize that point enough. So having a magazine like Wizard that almost chronicled, day to day what was happening with the indie publishers was just great. It was really great, and it's fun listening to those guys go through and break down those particular issues. Now, one thing I always noticed when they would break down the Wizard books was that they almost seemed to go out of their way to stay out of the pop culture war. If you know anything about the horrid communities that exist online, you'll know that there are crazy pop culture wars that go on that are wrapped into politics forwards and backwards, and those things are to be expected when you're dealing with artistic communities. Artists are always inspired by or infuriated by politics, but what we've had to deal with over, I would say, at least the last 10, if not 15 years, has been beyond the pale in terms of politics, like both sides. I just consider myself a guy in the middle trying to survive, and there are lunatics to the left and the right of me that are kind of making the entire world worse for everyone. And the kayfabe guys, they really kind of avoided it because you would see things that they should have been a direct reference to, that ongoing pop culture war, and they just wouldn't mention. They would just move right past it. So they really kind of tried to stay out of it. They never spoke for or against any one side. And I think in the end, this kind of showed that if you don't choose a side, you'll have sides chosen for you. Because when Cartoonist Kayfabe, when the run ended, they were basically attacked by everyone. Everyone from the left, everyone from the right, because they never really took a stand or made a stance anywhere political. So all those bizarro world political factions made that decision for them. They just decided, well, you're just our enemy. So they were basically everyone's enemy at that point. You could see that jealousy had been fermenting for quite some time, and people waited for them to slip up. Okay, I don't want to go too much into anything negative. I want this to be like a positive celebration because that's the kind of individual I am. I'm not the person that wants to carry around my scars and all of my weaknesses and all of the horrible things that I've had to endure or been through or this or that. That's not who defines me as a person. I define myself through positive characteristics, and that's how we should interact with the world in a more positive way to try to bring about more positive outcomes for ourselves, for the things we do, for the people around us, for the world at large. Okay, so that's why I want to talk about the positive things. Another thing, aside from the magazine commentaries, I really enjoyed were what they called the Kayfabe courtroom. I mean, all the shoot interviews are great. If you skip to the shoot interviews here. I mean, if there was like a creator that they talked to that you really liked, I mean, they would have a fantastic interview with them. Really, in a lot of cases, I think they didn't quite even go far enough. I mean, they were great interviews, but there was still like so much more that they could have asked them that just never came out. But what can you do? What can you do? You can't spend 10 hours interviewing Mike Mignola. You're lucky to get 15 minutes or half an hour or what have you of the guy's time. So I really love the shoot interviews, but also the Kayfabe courtroom where they would go back and read transcripts from these infamous court cases in comics history. Usually those transcripts came from the Comics Journal, which Ed was associated with through Fantagraphics. And they would just read it, line for line, whether it was the case about who created Blade, or when Harlan Ellison was sued because of his interview in the Comics Journal, or the various courtroom dramas surrounding Todd McFarlane and Neil Gaiman's battle, or the battles to return Jack Kirby's artwork, and they might have spotlighted John Byrne, where he called where he was called a cog in the machine, and he basically just towed the party line while he was there as their superstar artist. But it wasn't until a few years later, when he was on the outs and the Image guys were on the rise, that he decided to turn against Marvel and what have you. But anyway, those were fun things. Another really fun series that they had were the Kayfabe commentaries, where they talked about their own work. Like bringing in Tom Scioli to talk about his Stan Lee graphic novel, or Ed sharing a director's commentary, if you will, of his work on Red Room, or like their Grand Design books or what have you. Which, mind you, I was never a fan of any of the Grand Design books, but I thought Red Room was really good. I thought it was really transgressive, and I thought it was a worthy, underground comic in the vein of underground comics, and I think its success speaks to that. And of course, I guess the most positive thing you can talk about is the way that they ended every video with telling people make more comics or read more comics, and just espousing the love that they had for not only the medium but the genre itself. So to that I say thank you, Ed Piskor. Thank you, Jim Rugg. If anyone in Ed's family ever comes across this, this episode is dedicated to you. I just want you to know that there were positive outcomes, that Ed did help change things and influence people in ways that may never be understood. One of my favorite things was when Ed and Jim had such a wacky chemistry that they would say, because Jim was kind of the straight man to Ed's wild man. Ed was unfiltered, and he had this whole kind of hip-hop gimmick that he maintained the whole time. He always had his sunglasses on camera, and his hat, and he usually had his sunglasses on at the convention too. But their interactions were hilarious, because Ed would say something out of pocket, and Jim would just be like, what do you mean? I remember one of the funny ones. They were breaking down Alan Moore's Halo Jones, and Ed made this comment. He was talking about like the typography in the, I guess what was Alan Moore's original script, because it was reprinted in the back of the latest hardback collection of Halo Jones. And he said, this is what set off Ted Kaczynski. And Jim was incredulous in his response. Halo Jones? It was just funny little things like that where they would have an interaction. And no, he wasn't talking about Ted Kaczynski reading Halo Jones and going crazy. He was talking about the way that whatever typewriter Alan Moore was using had like some kind of error in the type when it would put the ink to the page. So anyway, that was just a funny little interaction to me, and their shows were full of that kind of funny, fun stuff. Ed would refer to stuff as gimmicks all the time. Here's a guy with the hook gimmick going on, and it was very a wrestling kayfabe way. I mean, it's even in the name of the show. Kayfabe comes from is a wrestling terminology in that you always kind of maintain a persona. There's always this mask. There's always this illusion of the play is the thing. The play is wrestling, the match, the show, the continuity. It's the same with cartooning. Okay, so they maintained a certain level of kayfabe, and it was for the sake of entertainment, so to speak. But yeah, the Halo Jones thing really cracked me up. There were a lot of other lines. I just inspire you to go out and check out some fun stuff. Jim always pointing out silhouettes. Look at that silhouette. He just loved his silhouettes. Or the way Ed would refer to like boring characters as like some old Karen or something to that effect, or calling somebody crackhead Bobby Brown. Just funny stuff like that. Those are things that I like to remember. So I'm going to talk about some of the responses I got when I asked people, what does the kayfabe effect mean to you 1 year later? But before I do that, today's episode of Comic-Jutsu is brought to you by Eastgate Comics. That's right, located at 609 McDonald Court in High Point, North Carolina. Eastgate Comics is your home for comics. Marvel, DC, Independence, what have you. They have all of your latest and greatest new releases, and they even have an upcoming comic convention. So visit their website at Eastgate Comics. Check that out. If you're in the High Point area, stop by, talk to Daryl, tell him that JT and Comic-Jutsu sent you. They'll give you a good old discount. It is your source for golden to modern age comics, supplies, collectibles, and so much more. I actually love getting my decorated short boxes from them. That's one of the recent trends in comic collecting that I really love, where they put a great piece of artwork on the side of a short box, like such as like an Alex Ross cover or print or what have you, because it really livens up that drab stack of white comic boxes, that sit like a monolith wherever you have them stored. So I love seeing that. So anyway, Eastgate Comics, go check them out. You'll have fun. Visit one of their cons and get everything you need. Ooh, it looks like they have some new comic boxes that I need to get. I see Kingdom Come and a really nice Alex Ross Incredible Hulk short box there. And if you hear the bells ringing behind me, that is because my cat, Mr. Sasha, is in here playing, and he's decided to start making noise right in the middle of my recording. So, what can you do? What can you do? I suppose I will just start moving towards wrapping this up, because I asked the kayfabers, what does the kayfabe effect mean to you? Now, I'm going to ignore all the self-centered, woe is me responses, but some of them, like my friend Hart Fisher said, kayfabe meant so much to me that I started a new TV series for American horrors called Trike's Comic Alley. So go and check that out. There are other responses, such as, it was a cool time where two average guys were changing things, loved them, disagree with them, or even hate them. No one could deny kayfabe was great for comics. Kayfabe Effect always walked a tightrope of highlighting underappreciated comics and fueling competitive speculation. I think we can just stop at the highlighting underappreciated comics, because, people's reaction to what came out of that's not the fault of the people doing it. They never said, charge more for these comics, make the most money you can, because that's not what it was about. They even showed on their show, they would beat their comics to heck and back. And that's the sign of a real collector. You can have a great, super valuable book in your hands, and you know what? You just beat the crap out of it because you're not selling it. Maybe your kids will sell it one day when you're long gone, but it's not leaving your collection. So, it's a book to be read. Let's see. There are also a few more. It introduced me to a great community and many new creators who I'd never heard of. During the pandemic, it especially reignited my personal creative side, as well as the comics lover and collector in me. It means a positive community that pushes each other to create the best stories. That's what it is to me, a driving force that keeps the lead on paper. My personal thoughts were, the kayfabe effect brought people together. Creators, consumers, artists, readers of all degrees, appreciators of various genres. Some were inspired to create, others were inspired to teach, and some just came for a good recommendation or two. And I think that's the positive note that I want to end this episode on, and this channel. I'm not ending my channel, mind you. Comic-Jutsu is ongoing, on and on, forever and ever. And lest I forget, I do want to say probably my most favorite recommendation, something I had no idea that existed, was the City of Fire portfolio by Moebius and Jeff Darrow. I had no idea this was such a thing. It's actually become one of my new holy grails, which I'll probably never obtain. Because it goes for thousands and thousands of dollars. If you're not familiar with City of Fire, it is a densely illustrated and inventively imagined suite of 10 images made by Moebius in collaboration with Jeff Darrow. Darrow met with Moebius in Los Angeles when Moebius was working on Walt Disney's Tron movie, so this was the early 80s. He later went to Paris, where he and Moebius collaborated on this series of images. Darrow made the initial pencil drawings, and Moebius traced them in ink, reworking the scenes as he went and adding color. These images are like concept paintings for a science fiction film set in a densely populated city of humans, humanoids, and fanciful animals. All one needs is a plot. Those portfolios are super expensive, but the Kayfabe boys were able to get a hold of a copy, and I loved their video breaking it down, just talking about, who drew this piece. Was it Moebius? Was it Jeff Darrow? Who did the coloring on this? And they would talk about various coloring techniques. And that's personally like one of my favorites. So I have a new holy grail that I'll never obtain. I think as collectors, it's important that we always have you always have one more unobtainable holy grail, because it's like that scene in Mallrats where, not Randall Pink Floyd, but his brother is talking to Stan Lee, and Stan tells him, not all the comics in the world is worth losing your love for. So, you don't ever want to get to the point where you feel like you have everything. You always want to have something else to achieve. I'm not sure if my final quote there was it's going to be taken in the correct context, but it just means you always need something. There's always something that is part of the collecting, is part of the battle. What do the Japanese call it? Tsundoku, the art of collecting books to be read at a later date. That in itself brings so much joy. So whatever it is to you out there, whether it's reading more comics or making more comics or just talking about comics that brings you joy, I encourage you to please keep doing that. And most of all, make sure you are subscribed to the Comic-Jutsu YouTube channel and the podcast so you can continue to get episodes like this. I do still have tons of ideas for great content, sharing looks at some of my recent purchases. it's just a matter of just balancing time and work, and still being creative, but not letting the promotion side of things like dominate everything I do, because it's not what's most important. What's most important is getting out there and living and sharing your love for all things, and hopefully making the world a better place. And to me, that's what the Kayfabe effect is all about. Thank you for listening. This is Comic-Jutsu. I'm JT, and you've been listening to The Art of Comics.